Tonight, if someone asked you the earliest memory you have, you would probably think for a moment. Maybe you see a flash of a kitchen, a smell, a face leaning over you. But no matter how hard you push, the first 2 or 3 years of your life are just gone. Not blurry, not faint, gone. And the strange thing is, that is not a malfunction. It is by design. You were conscious back then, fully awake, feeling every sensation with an intensity you will never feel again. You were learning faster than any human being ever will at any other point in their life, and yet you can retrieve almost none of it. The question is why, and the real answer is far stranger than you probably think. Most people assume they cannot remember being a baby because their brain was not developed enough to record memories. That sounds reasonable. Babies seem simple, helpless, unaware. But that assumption is wrong. Babies are not failing to form memories. They are forming them constantly, at a rate that would exhaust an adult. The problem is not storage. The problem is something much deeper. In the 1980s, a developmental psychologist named Mark Howe began a series of studies trying to understand why early childhood memories vanished. What he found was not what he expected. Children as young as 18 months could remember specific events with surprising accuracy: a distinctive toy, a sequence of actions, a face they had only seen once. The memories were there, but when those same children were tested years later, the memories were gone. They had not decayed, they had been overwritten. The architecture of the brain had changed so dramatically that the old filing system no longer existed. Your brain as an infant was not a smaller version of your brain today. It was a fundamentally different kind of machine. Here is what that machine was doing. From the moment you were born, your brain was generating new neurons at a staggering rate. Millions of new brain cells per day flooding into the hippocampus, which is the region most responsible for forming long-term memories. This process is called neurogenesis, and in infants, it is running at full throttle. The hippocampus was being rebuilt, rewired, and expanded constantly. And here is the problem with that. Every time a flood of new neurons arrives, the existing network gets disrupted. The connections that stored your old memories get rerouted. The file gets moved to a folder that no longer has a label. The memory doesn't disappear instantly, it just becomes unreachable. A researcher named Paul Franklin at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto ran an experiment that changed how scientists think about this. He and his team found that in young mice, the same burst of neurogenesis that made their brains grow faster also made them forget faster. The more new neurons arrived, the more old memories were erased. When the researchers artificially slowed neurogenesis in young mice, the animals suddenly retained memories for much longer. When they artificially sped up neurogenesis in adult mice, those adults started forgetting at the rate of infants. The mechanism was not mysterious. More growth meant more overwriting. In other words, the same biological process that was making you smarter was erasing your past. But there's a second reason, and this one hits differently. To form a memory that you can later retrieve as an adult, you need more than just the experience itself. You need a frame for it. You need language. You need a self. Think about how you remember things now. You don't just remember events, you remember them as happening to you. You were there. You felt something. You narrate the memory as you recall it. That narration requires a narrator, and you didn't have one yet. The sense of self, the persistent internal voice that says, "This is my life and I am the one living it," does not fully come online until somewhere between 2 and 4 years old. Before that, experiences happen, but there is no stable I to attach them to. When psychologist Catherine Nelson at the City University of New York studied how young children develop autobiographical memory, she found that the shift happened almost entirely through language. Children who learned to talk about their experiences with parents, who were asked, "What happened today?" and "What did you feel?" developed earlier and more reliable autobiographical memories.
Children who were not narrated to, who did not have their days described back to them in story form, had fewer memories that survived into adulthood. It wasn't just about the experience, it was about the story built around it. Your parents were narrating your life before you could narrate it yourself, and still, most of it vanished, because the narrator inside you was not yet stable enough to hold it. There's a name for this phenomenon. Scientists call it infantile amnesia, and the cutoff is remarkably consistent across cultures, across languages, across socioeconomic backgrounds. Almost no one can reliably recall a memory before age 2. Memories from age 2 to 3 are partial, fragmented, often emotionally vivid but contextually empty. You might remember a feeling of warmth, but not the room it happened in, a sense of fear, but not the face that caused it. By age 3.5, memories start to stick. By 5, the adult system is beginning to take shape. But here's the part that most people never hear. Those lost memories didn't leave without a trace. Your brain kept the emotional residue, the patterns, the templates. Research by psychologist Alison Gopnik at the University of California, Berkeley, suggests that early experiences shape the default emotional frameworks the brain uses for the rest of life, even when the specific memories that built those frameworks are gone. If you were held consistently when you cried, your nervous system learned that the world responds. You cannot remember the specific moments of being held, but somewhere in your body, in the baseline level of anxiety you carry or don't carry, those moments are still speaking. The memory is gone, the lesson remains. This is why certain things move you for reasons you can't explain. A particular quality of afternoon light, the smell of something being cooked, a stranger's voice that sounds like someone you should know. Your body is recognizing a pattern that your conscious mind has no access to. You are reacting to a memory you cannot retrieve. In some ways, those early years are the most influential of your entire life and the least available to you. You can't revisit them, you can't interrogate them, you can't edit the story. They simply exist underneath everything, shaping your fear responses, your attachment style, your baseline sense of the world, whether it's safe. There's a term in developmental psychology for what gets built in those first years. Researchers call it the internal working model. It's essentially a rough template your brain builds for how relationships work, how danger feels, how much trust is appropriate. That template was assembled from thousands of interactions you will never consciously remember, and it influences every relationship you've had since. So when you try to remember being a baby and find nothing, that blankness is not the absence of something important, it's the silence left behind after something enormous already happened. Your brain was not idle in those years. It was running the most intensive construction project of your life, building the emotional architecture, wiring the threat detection systems, laying the foundations of personality. It just didn't keep the receipts. And that's a strange thing to sit with. The most formative period of your existence is the one you have zero access to. The years that built the person who is reading this right now are sealed off, not by forgetting exactly, but by the fact that the brain that lived those years no longer exists in the same form. It grew past them, it overwrote them, it used them as raw material, and then moved on. Mark Howe, the same researcher who first mapped infantile amnesia in the 1980s, spent decades asking what this means for identity. His conclusion was unsettling. The I you think of as continuous, the you that has always been you, is actually a later construction. It was built on a foundation you can't see, using memories you can't access, by a version of you that no longer exists. The earliest you is gone. What remains is what it built. Tonight, if you try again to find your earliest memory, you'll probably hit the same wall. That flash of a kitchen, that blurry face, those fragments floating without context. But now you know what that wall actually is. It's not a failure of your memory. It's the scar left behind by the fastest growth your brain ever achieved. The silence where your first years used to be is the exact shape of everything you became.